Hi, welcome back to KLM, and we're zocha to be in the Beis Midrash of the Noahide Torah site. It's a very big privilege, okay? We're going back to focus on something that's a little shocking, we said. Normally, Judaism is about being in a state of joy, in a state of content, in a state of happiness, right? Yet, 3 weeks in a year, maybe there's a couple more days, we're told to be unhappy. We're told to focus on what we're lacking, right? And that's a little shocking, right? Because it says in Pirkei Avos that a person is a wealthy person, is happy with his portion, and now we're supposed to focus on what we're missing and, if you will, be in a bad mood. Now listen to the degree they expect this of us, okay? We're supposed to, the Arizal says that during right now the 9 days, you should spend half an hour a day crying, okay? And not tears of joy, okay? Tears of the sadness. So despondency, crying, it doesn't almost seem Jewish, okay? So that's what we're told to do. And I want to tell you, this is a secret. Once you hear it, it won't be. But there's something extraordinary about when Hashem commands us to do something, okay, right? We're talking about kavanah and the mitzvahs, but emotions that are not healthy, okay, worry and anxiety are, without question, first of all the scientists will tell you, the stress, the doctors will tell you that stress and worry and fear and depression are very harmful for your health. And the Vilna Gaon, who was 300 years ago he said this too. He said that the emotions like fear and worry and sorrow, he says they shorten your life and they make your life miserable, okay? Yet, here's something amazing. When Hashem tells you, feel fear, we know from Rabbeinu Yonah, worry about the consequences, right? Or when we're told during the 3 weeks, be in a state of mourning, feel bad, feel sad. Guess what? Says the Vilna Gaon, all right, based on Mishlei, it lengthens your life because it's a spirit. There's a holiness. When Hashem says this emotion you should have, don't run away from it, don't avoid it, because it comes from a divine source. It won't affect you the same way. It is healthy, extremely healthy, okay? So I just want to point out that right now, because, it's funny, somebody I really respect who has a Torah site, and he was saying, he selected a class because he says, most classes right now are kind of focusing on sad things, and this is an uplifting perspective. He was talking about some other class. And I understand that, the natural emotion, but right now, the most enlivening thing you can do is to feel sad and bad. All right? So that's what we're going to continue. But we're going to go to another level. I want to raise our level to a very, very high place. Okay? Now, first, I want to explain something, because we're getting closer and closer to the 9th of Av. And the 9th of Av, says one of our greatest rabbis of all time, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, he says also a very surprising statement. He says you can get more chizuk, you can grow more on Tisha B'Av than Yom Kippur. That is hard to believe, okay? And one of the greatest rabbis right now explained this. Rav Gershon Edelstein, he's one of the Gedolei Ador right now. He wanted to explain, how can Rabbi Salanter claim this? On Yom Kippur, we're like angels. It's considered just next to Shabbos, it's the holiest day of the year, right? And yet he says you can get more done on Tisha B'Av, right? So how do we understand this? So he goes to Rabbeinu Yonah, Shari Tshuva. He says, when we talk about Tshuva, what I'd like to focus on is like becoming a better person, improving yourself, right? Removing your deficiencies, etc., right? So Rabbeinu Yonah dedicates an entire section to how do you get yourself to do tshuva? How do you arouse yourself to do that, right? So Rav Edelstein says, look at the first thing he says. He starts with the easiest, he says. He says, you know what causes a lot of people to do tshuva? Suffering and difficulty and troubles and trials. I mean, one of the things is, some of the people that I know that struggled with addiction, right? And then they got out of it. These people are on the spiritual level that I envy, okay? But what often happens with them, they hit rock bottom. Their life started to fall apart, and they realize, I have no choice but to improve here. I have to change something, right? So that's the power of suffering. Suffering gets you to be dissatisfied with the status quo, and that's where change comes, right? So this is the thing that he's saying. He's saying, what are we doing these 3 weeks? We're dwelling on the suffering that is taking place now, that took place then, what we're lacking with. This is a tremendous stimulus to change, to grow, and to develop, okay? So that's why this is just an amazing opportunity, okay? But now, I mentioned that there's actually, Judaism, what's so amazing is it has all these levels, right? Levels of, you can reach, this is a divine self-improvement program. There's no end. There's no end. Milos Elyonos in the mitzvahs, right? So we're going to go for a very high level. But the question is it permitted to act on a spiritual level that's seemingly beyond you? Okay? Now,
fake it till you make it, you mean?
right? Or to do acts that are known to be for the very, very holy. Okay, so there's a Gemara on this, and Rav Chaim Friedlander discusses this in Siftei Chaim. He says like this, a fascinating Gemara. Okay, there was a Rav Hamnuna, I think was his name, one of the Rav Hamnunas, and he was walking in public wearing, I think, black shoes. Now, in the times of he was an Amora. Back in the times of the Talmud, black shoes was a sign of mourning. Okay. So the rabbis put him in rabbinic prison. Why did they put him in prison? Because they felt he was being excessively pretentious, right? Because to be mourning, why was he wearing the black shoes? He was mourning the Yerushalayim being destroyed. And they said, who are you? How can you do that? But then they tested him in Torah, and they saw this person is what they call a Gavra Rabbah. He's a very big person, right? So he's allowed to make a public display of mourning, right? It's okay for him because he's a big person. What's the implication? If you're not a big person, you should not be going around showing, there's a great, listen to this classic. This is a classic. There was a Musar yeshiva in Europe, and it was, I think, the time of Slichos, right? And these two guys come into the shul, and they see their friend, their buddy, he's up by the Aron Kodesh, and he's holding on to the to the parochas, and he's going, "I'm nothing before you, Hashem. I'm nothing. I'm nothing." So the other two guys look at him and go, "Oh, look who thinks he's nothing." Look who thinks he's a nobody. It's a level to be a nobody, right? So what are we doing right now? We are publicly displaying that we're mourning, right? There's no music, there's no haircuts, we're not shaving, especially if you're used to shaving. It's clear you're doing public displays of mourning, right? If your shirts look a little dirty, why are you doing this? Right? So do we know the Torah of Rav Hamnuna? How do we have a right to do this? Right? Asked Rav Friedlander, right? So here's what's remarkable about these times, okay? Says Rav, since the rabbis say, right now publicly display your mourning, right? That means that there is a spiritual energy right now that elevates us, that raises up, that we can be on the level to mourn Yerushalayim. to feel the suffering of the Jewish people. We can reach a very high level right now. So you hear, now we can understand a bit, right, why this period can be more than Yom Kippur. We have a special support to reach a very high level, and I want to dare for us to try to do that right now, okay? So I want to show you what I call a scale of empathy, and this will hopefully, and I want it, by the way, what I like to do since we're so focused on the mitzvahs and having kavanah for mitzvahs, we're going to mourn, okay? This, it's not just on the 9th of Av. We're supposed to be mourning right now. That's the purpose of all these practices. So I'm going to introduce this scale, and we're going to mourn on each level and have kavanah for that. Okay. We're going to take advantage of the fact that we've been instructed to mourn right now. And I want us again, since we have this elevated status, I want us to see what we can ascend to and what we should try to do now, and especially on Tisha B'Av, okay? So I call this ascending the scale of empathy. Empathy is actually a very divine characteristic, right? Compassion, connecting to someone else's pain. It's right now it's become recognized in the world. It's how important it is in psychology and all these things, but it's a divine quality, okay? So we want to empathize with the agony right now. Again, this is not a happy time. Okay, this is a time for us to connect to the pain and agony, all right? So let's start on level 1, the least advanced, but it's also advanced, is what I call the agony of the soul, all right? Now it says in the Midrash Rabbah, the Koheles Rabbah, the Ramchal brings this in Mesilas Yesharim, it's such a deep thing. They describe that the following. There was a princess who married a very common person, a villager. I don't know how the marriage took place, but it took place. And he takes her to his little hut, and he's feeding her food, and it's just so distasteful to her, and she's really not happy in the situation. So that's the mashal, that's the metaphor. What's it talking about? It's the soul. The neshama goes into our bodies, right? Now, on the one hand, that's a great opportunity, but since the body is driven towards animalistic behavior, right? Stuffing its face and emotions that are petty and those kind of coarse behaviors that the body inclines us to, right? Our soul, the inner princess, is suffering, right? And this is it'd be very good for us to identify with this. As you get connected to Torah, you want to be good, you want to daven and connect to Hashem, you want to make blessings, right? And there's a part of you that says, I really want to, and then you just get stressed out and you don't focus and you get disappointed, right? Who is that? Where is the desire to actually connect spiritually coming from? And where is the disappointment coming from when we feel that way? Our soul. That's your neshama, right? And just if you think of our track record, we don't want to get angry, we don't want to speak lashon hara, when we're feeling frustration, it's the soul is in exile, it's in golus, right? What is exile? Exile is a very difficult environment to succeed in, right? When you're away from home. I mean, it's a silly metaphor, but when there's sports teams, right? So they call it the home team advantage, right? So when you're at home and you're in your environment, it's much more likely for you to succeed. So, our soul is kind of trapped in a dungeon, hence the picture, right? So the first thing we should feel agony over is the frustration our soul feels when our body dominates, okay? So what I want us to do right now, again, I want We do these practices right now. There's no music here. There'll be no music in the background. There's no shaving. There's no bathing right now on certain levels, right? All of these things. Let's have in mind right now two things. One, have in mind, Hashem, I'm fulfilling the Minhagei Yisrael. These are Minhagim, practices that Hashem wants us to fulfill, to mourn. So have in mind, I'm fulfilling those. But now let's put the purpose in, okay? So I want us to take a moment and feel the frustration of our soul, which is in its own gullus from the body. So just close your eyes for a second. I'll speak to it a little, and you can speak to it yourself. I'll just tell you. All right, I want you to stop and think for a second right now and have in mind the mitzvah of mourning, okay? And I want you to think about how frustrated your soul is, that it's not able to connect in the way it knows it wants to, it knows it's good. And think of the disappointment when we fail to control ourselves with other people, we fail to slow down and savor the words of the prayers that we pray. This is our souls in exile. And let's feel sad for it. And realize that's what these 3 weeks are for. Okay? That's stage one. Now let's talk about, we're going up in level, right? These are more sophisticated feelings. It's already a level to not focus on yourself, but your soul, your best part. That's a level. But even better is when you focus on others. And now we want to focus on the agony over our nation, the Jewish people, okay? Now, I'm going to, in order to introduce that, I'm going to share a story with you, okay? And I want everyone who's watching or here, I'd like you to close your eyes, unless you're going to fall asleep. Close your eyes, and I'm going to share this story with you. There was a prince that had acted poorly enough to be thrown out of the palace by his father. Now he's still wearing his royal garments, and he travels on the road until he reaches a small farm village. The simple villagers greet him warmly, and they offer him food and lodging as long as he'll do some farm work. The work is a killer for the prince. You know, his pampered life left him with a soft body, and his hands are hurting with blisters. And the simple food is a struggle to keep down after a diet of the finest delicacies. He cries himself to sleep on a straw mattress. After a year or two, the prince is no longer pampered. He now wears simple peasant's clothes, and his stomach is adjusted to the village food. In fact, he has become completely comfortable with his commoner's life. Now, around this time, the king who misses his son begins to long to see him. So he sends messengers to find the prince and return him to the king. The messengers inquire around until they find the village where the prince now lives. When they are pointed to his direction, they can't believe their eyes. There's not even a faint resemblance to the royal prince who left the palace a couple years ago. They spoke with the prince, but they couldn't contain themselves. They burst out in tears. The prince reassured them, "I'm fine now. I've completely adjusted to this way of life. The time you should have pitied me is when I first came to the village. I felt so out of place and miserable, and I wanted so badly to return to the palace. That's when I needed your pity and your sympathy." Adarabba, just the opposite, say the king's messengers. Now's the time things are horrible for you. You've forgotten who you are and where you come from. You don't even care about whether you return. At least when you first left, you knew who you were and where you belonged. You realized you were the son and the daughter of a king, and you belong in the king's palace. Okay, now let's take advantage of this story. We now want to go to the next level and extend past the concern of our soul, and let's mourn the state of the Jewish people. You know, I don't know the exact numbers, but maybe there's about 10 million Jews. I don't know the exact numbers, but millions of Jews have become villagers. They don't know they have royal blood, that they're supposed to have a lofty leadership role to bring the world to Hashem. They've lost sight and they become completely attached to the village, right? That's really sad, right? I mean, there's so much to feel for the Jewish people. There's been so much suffering, right? And I want to quote, you know, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says, you know, if you can go to sleep at night and you're not crying over the state of the Jewish people and their alienation from Hashem, from each other, broken into groups, he says, you're cruel. It's a very heavy statement. But right now, let's be sure we're not cruel, okay? So let's stop again. Let's have in mind, Hashem, I'm doing these enactments to connect to the agony over our Jewish nation, right? Who feel this right now. Have in mind you're doing mourning right now. Mourn the state. Think of how far away, from alienated, how disconnected, all the suffering and pain of our people, the lack of realization of our royal purpose and the glorious world we live in. Just take a moment and feel that. Okay, let's raise one more level. Okay, this is the highest level of all. Okay? The agony of our divine parent. Allow me to explain. This term in Hebrew is called to connect to the tsar of the Shekhinah, to the suffering that the divine presence experiences. Now this is a very, very lofty level, okay? And to explain, I'm going to give you a couple metaphors also, okay? Now, most of the time, the Creator, Hashem, the Divine, is really feeling our pain and our suffering, right? But you know what we're really meant to do? And Rav Chaim Volozhin says, when you're praying, you notice it's in the plural, right? In the prayers of the Shemona Esrei. He says, why are you praying? You know, Hashem knows what He's doing. When He dishes out suffering or allows suffering to occur, Hashem, you know, it says, we declare, the Talmud says, Kol manda avad rachmana latavavad. Everything Hashem does for good. So why are we saying, remove our troubles, remove our suffering? So listen to the beautiful reason. Why? Because the divine, Hashem, suffers when we suffer. He feels our pain. And in other words, we're not trying to get rid of it for ourselves. We realize how the divine experiences suffering when we suffer. Such a beautiful thing to strive for, okay? And allow me to say something very heavy, again from Rav Chaim Volozhin. What does the divine suffer over? Or what? Let me ask it this way. What does the Shekhinah, divine presence, Hashem, suffer over the most? Listen to this metaphor. It's a little chilling, okay? There's a father whose son got drunk and he went to the roof of his house. And in those days, they had these flat roofs. You could stand up there, right? The son gets drunk and he falls off the roof. And he breaks so many bones in his body, right? Now, exactly, I understand how you're feeling. You can imagine, right? He was alive though. They take the son to the hospital, and the father's of course there, and they're resetting his bones. And this shrieking in agony, right? Now let me ask you a question. When did the father feel the most suffering? When he sees his son fall off to his possible death, or when he's getting their bones reset? Falling off to his death, right? The bones, he loves his son, he hates to see his son suffer, but what's worth, he didn't. So, when we don't follow Hashem's will, and we hate other Jews, and when we do the wrong thing, it's like the drunk kid falling off the roof. Hashem knows the destruction that we wreak when we sin and when we have hatred and we do the thing. It is devastating, right? Now the pain is meant to heal. It's resetting the bones. And he still feels that. No father, no mother likes to see their kids suffer. And they did something stupid, right? And you were terrified that they're going to hurt themselves. But then when you're not happy that they have to, that shows you, you're not callous. Hashem feels our pain that he needed to maybe allow, right? He feels it more than any of us do, our own pain or the pain of our children. It's incredible, the divine agony over the Jew suffering, right? So now this is what we should head for. This is why you can reach an incredible level, like Yom Kippur on Tisha B'Av, and right now, is if you stop and think about the divine suffering, right? And so I'm going to just do a little guided talk on this too. We're going to fulfill this right now. And again, we're supposed to be mourning now. Every day we should be mourning. Maybe we can avert the 9th of Av, but if we at least get to 9th of Av, we have a program here of ascending, okay? So if you want to close your eyes for a second, all right? So I'd like you to think about some suffering that, God forbid, lo aleinu, but think of the suffering of, I was my son got hurt and he had to go to the children's emergency room in the hospital, and I see these young kids with their heads shaved, and all sorts of suffering. So, you think of that kind of suffering. Think of people who are unfortunately not married, who are, just think of all the suffering that the Jews are experiencing right now, right? In South Africa, there's terrible problems with the corona, and the Jewish community is Shem Yerachim, right? So I just want to think about this, and just think about that. Let's stop for a second and realize that any single instance of these sufferings, Hashem feels so much more than the person who's experiencing suffering, the loved ones, everyone. So let's stop a moment and empathize with the agony the Divine Presence has, that this is the way. He just wants to shower us with love and good. This is a killer, if you will. Okay, so just take a moment and feel that. Okay, so I just want to review. Tisha B'Av, these 9 days, it's going to get more and more uncomfortable, right? No, the showers, the whole thing is uncomfortable, and in Israel, Hashem made it nice and juicy hot, and you can't shower and all this stuff. Again, speak to your local rabbi, there's qualifications, but right now, let's take advantage. It's for a purpose, right? This is the time of the year where you're going to feel elevation and actually an uplift if you feel bad, if you focus on the agony of your neshama, the agony of the Jewish people, and the agony of HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Shama shir shir chadasha